With the release of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 Episode 4, the anime has now wrapped up the Toji vs Gojo fight, an amazing adaptation of the source material. And in this video I wanted to go over the nuances that surrounded this fight, and specifically the dynamic between Gojo and Toji, and why Toji actually could never beat Gojo. But before we begin the video, of course I'd like to say that if you enjoy these type of videos, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel since I make content like this all the time, and also consider joining my membership to join the members only Discord server. Well, without further ado, let's get into the video. Now of course we all know why Gojo, Toji, and Geto met in the first place. Toji was hired to kill Riko Amane, the Star Plasma Vessel, and Gojo and Geto, being the strongest duo there is, just happened to be guarding her. And due to Gojo being a 6 eyes and limitless user, Toji decided to wear both Gojo and Geto down by putting a bounty on her on the dark web, so multiple cursed users would begin fighting Gojo and Geto, keeping them on guard at all times. This worked specifically well for weakening Gojo, since at this time he didn't have full mastery of the limitless curse technique, and it was still very draining for him to use for a long period of time. And this of course leads to Toji stabbing him in the back as soon as he lets his guard down, thinking he would be safe inside of the Jujutsu Kaisen barrier. But of course, Toji being gifted with heavenly restriction, this wasn't the case at all, and he was able to easily bypass the barrier without it even detecting him. And this leads to the first fight of Toji versus Gojo, which is the catalyst for everything that is soon to come. The fight begins with Toji being hit with blue and being pushed into Geto's curse, but with the soul liberation blade, which cuts on a spiritual level, he's able to easily break out of this curse's stomach. Soon after this, Gojo tries to hit him with another blue, but he's actually able to dodge this one, and that's when Gojo realizes that he has no curse energy at all and can't be sensed by him. And while Toji is just blazing around the battlefield with high speeds, once he gets close to Gojo, Gojo uses blue once again and pushes him away. But this ended up being a bad idea for Gojo, since their surroundings have so many hiding spots for Toji to be in. He had no clue where he was going to be next. And of course it doesn't help that he can't sense Toji, so he decides to use a maximum curse energy output version of blue and completely destroys the surroundings in order to be able to see everything. And that's when a bunch of fly heads come out that was stored inside of Toji's curse. But of course with Gojo having infinity, these fly heads have no way of getting through that, so Gojo is perfectly fine against them. But Gojo then realizes that he is not their target. Toji's true target has been Riko the whole time. So thinking that this was just simply a distraction, Gojo drops his guard for a split second, and Toji takes advantage of this to the maximum extent, stabbing him with the inverted spear of heaven, completely going through infinity due to the spear's ability, which is the forced stoppage of any curse technique. Now this was already a lethal blow, but to add insult to injury, Toji begins completely destroying his body from top to bottom, and ends it all off by stabbing him in the head with a normal knife. And at the end of all he says is, "I'm starting to remember how to do this." Now there are two ways to interpret this statement. One is that he's starting to remember how to assassinate people and hit the right vital spots, or two, he's just remembering how to fight in general again. And there are evidence for both sides that I'll go over real quick, because it is pretty important to why Toji could never beat Gojo. Now the reason that Toji could be talking about just assassination skills is because before, when he stabbed Gojo originally, he says that he missed all his vital spots, which obviously an assassin probably wouldn't do if he was at his peak abilities. But then after getting this absolute combo off on Gojo, he says that he's finally remembering how to do this, and he thinks he's killed him. But in my opinion, this also is talking about speed and whatnot, rather than just assassination skills. Due to Toji, like I mentioned, first being hit by blue, but then being able to casually dodge it. Now of course you can bring into account the distance away that the blues were to him, and I do think that that is very important, but my idea gets more evidence behind it as we move on in the manga. To continue on to the Geto versus Toji fight, Toji begins by cutting Geto's most durable soul completely in half with the soul liberation blade, but is then hit by the simple domain of a cursed spirit. Now I've seen a lot of confusion on this scene due to the translation that Viz does, calling this domain an innate domain rather than a simple one. Obviously, as we know, people like Toji and Maki can't be recognized by the barriers of domains, making them immune to their sure hit effects. But since this is a simple domain like New Shadow style, they are actually vulnerable to it because it isn't a literal domain expansion. But Geto has no trouble getting rid of the simple domain, and in an attempt to catch him while he was off guard, Geto attempts to steal his cursed spirit, which was actually rejected by the spirit itself, and the fight concludes with Geto being dissected by Toji. And the only reason he didn't die is because Toji didn't know what would happen to the cursed spirits after Geto had died. Now to go back to what I was saying before, we have Toji going from having a long drawn out fight with Gojo to being able to deal with Geto pretty easily. And Geto and Toji are people that I believe are relative or equal at this point in time in the story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that we know that they get into fights all the time, which is stated in a volume extra. And even with this and Geto completely knowing about his abilities, he's still confident in fighting Gojo multiple times. There's also the narrative of them both being the strongest. The narrative basically is that they both hold the title of the strongest, and as soon as Gojo pulls up and, becomes the strongest on his own, they completely lose all their relationship, and it leads to Geto actually going into his descent, because their closeness came from them both carrying the burden of being the strongest, not just one of them being the strongest. So overall in stats, I do believe that Gojo and Geto are relative, but Geto being completely outclassed by Toji after Toji says that he's remembering how to do this basically implies to me that Gojo was just a warm-up to get him back into the group, and as soon as he got his abilities back, well, it was no chance for Geto. Now moving on to the most important part of this video, it's resurrected Gojo versus Toji. Gojo, being on the brink of death, was finally able to learn the insights of cursed energy and the core of it, and this allowed him to use reverse curse technique at the last moment in order to save himself. And he tells Toji that he lost when he didn't cut his head off, and he should have used a cursed tool when he stabbed him in the head. But Toji simply replies, "Lost? The battle's just beginning." And Gojo, still in a delirious state, says, "What? Is that right? Maybe you're right, you're so right." And the fight begins once again with Toji speeding up to get to Gojo, with Gojo easily dodging his attacks multiple times, and being able to slip behind him and use curse technique reversal, red. Toji was able to block this with the inverted spear of heaven, and took little to no damage with no broken bones and whatnot. And after this, Toji quickly goes over the limitless curse technique, concluding that none of them are a problem because he has abilities that can take care of them. But even beyond this, Toji feels some type of uneasiness inside of his body. As he sees Gojo floating in an air with a complete grin on his face, Gojo looks at Toji, and Toji freezes for a moment thinking about the uneasiness that's coursing through him. But he reassures himself, saying no, everything's okay, and goes to kill Gojo once more. The fight begins once more with Gojo dodging Toji's attack and ending him with a hollow purple, and Toji feels this uneasiness coursing through his body once again. Toji then thinks back to when he said he doesn't work for free, and goes on to say that's what he would always say before making a run for it. But now that the awakened power of the Limitless stands before him, he's probably the greatest sorcerer alive. Toji goes on to say that he wanted to discredit it and to crush it, the pinnacle of the Jujutsu world and the Zenin family. He wanted this for self-affirmation, and he deviated from his true self. And Toji concludes saying that at that point, he had already lost. And in my opinion, this is very, very true. If you don't know, heavenly restriction users like Toji and Maki, their potential and power depends a lot on the mindset of the user. And this actually can be stretched to go for almost any Jujutsu user, but let's start with the Maki example. In the beginning of Maki's fight with Naoya was able to completely destroy and blitz around Maki pretty easily, but after viewing the way that Daido fights with the Soul Liberation Blade, and after fighting with the sumo wrestler and freeing herself, she's able to completely elevate from a level that she was at before, with everyone even noticing this from her mere presence on the battlefield. And she's even able to blitz the same Naoya that blitzed her before numerous times. This same mindset things goes with multiple other Jujutsu sorcerers and curses, such as Jogo, who was told by Sukuna that if he wanted to reach the heights of Gojo Satoru, he could have just burned everything down to the ground without a second thought. And of course Megumi, who experienced exponential growth after using his domain for the first time, and deciding to win even if he dies, rather than win by dying. What I'm getting at is basically that it's a consistent thing that Jujutsu sorcerers and even curses have varying levels of power depending on their mindset, and this is even more obvious for heavenly restriction users like Maki and Toji. Which leads me to the point that Toji actually was not at full power while fighting Gojo. You see, in the first fight with Gojo, Toji was looking at it through a business lens. He didn't really care about pride at all. This is why he decided to wear down Gojo, do things like that in order to get the upper hand on Gojo without a second thought. And the only time I think pride really came into the mix was when he completely deformed Gojo's body. But Toji was really just fighting for a job. He wasn't fighting for affirmation or anything at that time. But as soon as Gojo comes back with the newfound power, Toji wants to completely discredit this, even though Toji's job was already done. He didn't even try to talk about Gojo and telling him that the job was finished, and that they have no real reason to fight, and if Gojo so decides to fight him after that, then he would be coming to Toji's terms, rather than Toji turning on his own ideals and pride in order to gain his own self-affirmation. Now with me saying all this and saying that Toji was basically weakened while fighting Gojo, you might be wondering, well, how strong is a hypothetical full power Toji? And that is a good question. And I believe we actually get our answer to this in the Shibuya arc. In chapter 98, there's a volume statement that reads, "A seance technique cast by one of the cursed users reincarnates a formidable opponent who once fought with a strength on par with Gojo." And that is of course Toji Zenin. Now let's dissect the statement for a moment. What do they mean by a strength on par with Gojo? Because we obviously know that Gojo wasn't on par with Toji in their first fight, and it was pretty much a stomp. And if we go back to what I was saying about Geto, then Toji wasn't even full power when he fought Gojo, so that still doesn't make sense. And of course we know that Toji wasn't fighting on par with RCT Gojo per se, and Gojo was actually beating him pretty easily. But notice how the statement is worded. It says once on par with Gojo. If we're going under my interpretation and you agree that Toji isn't full power while fighting Gojo in his RCT state, then that would mean that this could be talking about a hypothetical strongest Toji, which would of course lead to the conclusion that Toji at full power would be as strong as or on par with RCT Gojo. But you may even be able to get Toji even higher than this by using scaling of Maki, with of course Maki being able to keep up with people like 15 Fingers Sukuna, who's able to beat Ryu pretty easily, who, you know, fights on par with Yuta. But that really concludes why I think that Toji could never beat Gojo the way he was. The way he was at that moment simply wasn't enough, and he was simply doing it for self-affirmation rather than staying true to himself and keeping his full power. Of course, all this is just my interpretation of the manga, and you can have a different interpretation, which is perfectly fine. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and also consider joining my membership in order to join the members only Discord server. But yeah, goodbye.